حتى تحقيق الوعود دعوة نصر الجمهوري يا صنعاء دوري دوري يا صنعاء دوري دوري
There is overload in the cases here. No enough beds, no enough medications, no enough doctors, and no enough nurses.
Hello, I'm Rula Jibril. I'm a journalist, author, and a foreign policy expert. I would love to welcome two remarkable Yemeni women. Today, we will speak about the war, the forgotten war in Yemen, a war that we don't talk about in the media too often. We're too busy with SORMI and other things. The UN last week said that the war in Yemen created the worst humanitarian crisis since the founding of the United Nations itself. With me will join me two remarkable women, Afrah Nasser, who is an award-winning journalist and a blogger who is exiled in Sweden. And here is a friend of mine who I actually admire her work greatly, and Bushra Aldukhainah. And she's wearing a niqab. She's wearing a niqab because her work, Yemen CARE, is under threat. They provide shelter for people, they provide food, they provide medical aid, but they're threatened because they work in the worst areas in Yemen. And I will start with you. You just flew from Yemen, and I know that you've been working so hard on the issue since the beginning. But also you have 2 master's degrees, and when you married your husband, you put as a condition to marry him that he would accept that you pursue your degrees. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely right.
Can you please tell us about the magnitude of the crisis in Yemen today?
Actually, what's happening in Yemen is so difficult to explain for people living in this life and what's going on in Yemen, because it's massive needs and massive crisis. As you just mentioned, the UN declared that it's the worst crisis that is happening nowadays. You could imagine, like, out of 27 million people, 22.2 million are in massive need for different type of needs. They are in need of food, they are in need of clean water, they are in need of shelter, they are in need of health and nutrition, education. This is what's happening in Yemen. It's a forgotten war that is nobody talking about. Nobody knows what's going on in Yemen. Hardly some people know where Yemen is in the map. So what's happening here? We're talking about death of people, death of men and women and innocent children who had nothing to do with that. They had nothing to do with that. They just woke up, and sometimes they don't wake up just to find themselves without any basic services of life, without food, without shelter, homeless, and might also have lost their own beloved ones.
So, Bushra, you arrived, you managed displaced people, refugees, and you find yourself in that situation. Can you explain to us, please, in numbers, the crisis? The UN says that every hour, every day actually in Yemen, there are 130 children who died. There's 50,000 children who died since the beginning of this crisis. There's almost 2 million people who are in need of health care, and there's cholera. Can you tell us about these diseases that disappeared from our history, but there's outbreak of these diseases in Yemen?
Let me start with my displacement story. When I used to work for CARE, I joined CARE in 2010, and when we were started to provide the humanitarian assistance to the people, providing education, clean water, food, and economic resources for them to empower men and girls and children as well. In 2015, I found myself being displaced by force. I had no choice other than to run after my life and to escape with my kid and my husband, and also look for my staff who were working in that area. We found ourselves like facing the same critical situation where displaced people are. I cannot forget that day when that feeling, the bitter of leaving home behind, leaving everything behind. My son was telling me, "Mommy, can I take my toys with me?" And I was like, "Yusuf, I don't think there's time for this. Let's just run for our life." There was no time even to pick my son's toys. I cannot forgive myself that I didn't even listen to him, because I told him, we're gonna come back. This is just, it's not gonna take more than 2 weeks, a month maximum. But what happened is we were never able to come back. And millions of people are not able to come back to their homes. They've lost their homes, they've lost their lives. We were displaced again to another place. I stayed with my sister, and then airstrikes were there where 2 family members died. And I had to witness this death. My son, the 12 years old now, has witnessed this. And when he was asking me why this is happening, why my best friend has died, the same age he is, just died for no reason. When he asked me this question, I couldn't answer this.
But he told you something when you came here. What is the message that Yusuf asked you to carry to the American audience here, to the women of today?
That was just 2 days right before I come here. There was heavy airstrikes in the hotel where we were staying together, and we were just holding each other, and it was so terrible. It was so close, and we thought this is something really serious, which is every day we're facing. But then we were just holding each other. He was just hugging me, and he said, "Mommy, go and save Yemen," because he thinks that somebody has to do something, and he would be the most affected person of me leaving him behind in the country.
That's a Yusuf picture behind us. Please look at him, and when you think about Yemen. Afrah, I want to ask you, so clearly we don't know much about Yemen, but can you explain to us how this conflict started, and who are the players?
Well, before I answer your question, I want to ask the audience, how many of you were, what's going on in Yemen? How many of you know?
Please raise your hands. Anybody heard about Yemen?
That's improvement, actually. I was expecting none. But coming to the US for the second time, and even working internationally, covering Yemen and speaking about the international aspect to the conflict in Yemen, I'm struggling myself as a journalist to pitch stories and publish, because not a lot of people want to know about what's happening in Yemen or publish something about the war in Yemen. Absolutely, Yemen is underreported. It's in comparison to the conflict in Syria or natural disasters. Yemen is not getting equivalent media attention, and also considering that it is the largest, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world today, it's not getting enough media attention. And this is very shocking for me, especially for American audience, while Yemenis themselves on the ground know that this war is not only the Saudi-led coalition airstrike or war, it's also the American bombs falling on their heads and falling on their houses. When I call my family, my mom is busy going to a funeral or coming back from a funeral. Death is everywhere. If the airstrikes don't kill you, the lack of medicine and food and the cholera and the diseases will definitely kill you. It's a very, very tragic situation, and Yemenis know that the weapons falling on them are American-made. Only in 2018, Donald Trump signed a weapon deal with Saudi MBS with $12.5 billion. So actually, there are internationally banned weapons that were dropped in Yemen by the Saudi-led coalition that are reportedly by the reports from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty that are sealed with Western governments. So clearly, what's happening in Yemen is being assisted and supported by Western powers that are allies to the Saudi-led coalition. And on the same time, there are a raging civil war on the ground where there are rebel groups that are targeting systematically civilian areas such as in Taiz or other areas. And Yemenis are terribly suffering by all these sides. Yemen is literally under fire from multi-fronts. And nobody has to live in that situation.
So the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was here after a spree of kidnapping his own relatives in Riyadh. He came here. He was received by Donald Trump, by every elite group from Silicon Valley to Hollywood, celebrated with everybody. He's on the cover of Time magazine, and he's been called reformist. While he was defense minister, that was his signature policy. Can you tell us about how this forgotten war, underreported war, can be the juxtaposition between us calling this man who's leading that war and the blockade a reformist, and what's happening on the ground?
It's actually thanks to such groups like Women in the World that are doing, and when it comes to the American civil society organization, they're doing a remarkable job in trying to challenge that kind of narrative. When it comes to the governments, I don't have any hope with the U.S., the White House administration being an ally to MBS and giving a green light of committing whatever MBS would like to commit in Yemen. And I find it shocking that we could call a reformist the MBS while he's waging a war in the poorest Arab country. How could we call him a reformist when he's enforcing a blockade that are, intentionally and deliberately using food as a weapon of war, blocking food for people in Yemen, blocking access for journalists to go and report what's happening in Yemen, blocking medicine, blocking people for people to flee. When you think about Yemen being surrounded by these monarchies that are coming together to bomb this poorest Arab country, so this is cruelty. And yet, unfortunately, a lot of the U.S. media was glorifying the reforms he was making back home, and I think it was just a disgrace to dismiss the disastrous policies MBS is doing in Yemen. And it's thanks to such organization that we are trying to send the message, and hopefully the audience will be enlightened.
Bushra, I want to ask you about this. And so Americans understand very well the costs of any war. In the 80s, 79, there was Afghanistan. That unholy alliance with the jihadists, then many years after, Afghanistan became the playground for jihadists. Can Yemen become that in less than 5 years? A playground for jihadists, radicalization, there's no education?
I would say, and I would add to what Afrah mentioned about the $2.5 billion that was bought for weapons. I would say if we had all this money just to save the people in Yemen, what remarkable change we would have done. And I'm afraid to say that from what I see in the ground, from the people I see and the people I work with and I assist back in Yemen, I'm afraid to say that Yemen is going to be worse than Afghanistan.
So it will come back to haunt us, to haunt even the Americans who are unaware of what's going on the ground.
The problem is what's happening in Yemen is it's multiple crises. It's only not man-made. We have epidemics that has been like disappeared for decades. Who would have like imagined that cholera is back to the history? And it's just happening in Yemen.
You yourself had a fever. And would you like to talk about your health condition?
Yes, actually I had a dengue fever, and this is one of the killing diseases back in Yemen. So you could see the people are dying from the cholera, from the airstrikes, from the ground fighting, from the dengue fever, from the diphtheria. There are several diseases. You could have, like, it's too hard to put all together in your mind.
And the blockade is forbidding the medications to come.
Absolutely.
And that is Saudi Crown Prince signature.
When I got sick back in January, I had the access to the facilities, to medical facilities, but it was really poor. And I was like going through, I thought that it's gonna be it. I thought this is the end of my life because it was really serious. And I was just thinking, how people are just surviving, because this, like I would have imagined, like women in the rural areas or anywhere, they don't have access. I was just dying, and I had the access to the medical services. I had the people around me. I was like with my family at home, and I had all the facilities. And for the poor people, they had no other choice other than just die.
Afrah, what can we do here in the United States to pressure our politicians or even to help Yemen? What can we do from here? What can any of the people sitting in this audience?
It's tragic what's happening in Yemen. As someone who lived in Sweden, I think animals are better treated than how Yemenis are living, the conditions Yemenis are forced to live with. I get inspired by how, the anti-war movement in the U.S. during the Vietnam War, and I think I want like more and more of the Americans to go and to speak out against the war in Yemen and help pressure your senators to raise Yemen at the Congress, because at the Congress that's where our hope is. If your representatives are speaking against the American role in Yemen, at least we can help in stopping one actor in the war. Yemen is being, splitting into an international war. And you could bring peace to Yemen if you speak out and write to your representatives and write to them, what are we doing in Yemen? Why people are living in famine? Why people like Bushra have to live through, such diseases that are supposed to be, left in history that our civilization dealt with a long time before. So I believe in the American people. I don't believe in the government or on the White House. But I believe that if Americans actually fix politics in this country, they could put an end to the war in Yemen.
And
Bushra, also I want to ask you, how can we help your organization, CARE Yemen?
that's what I wanted to say. It's not only one thing that can be done to Yemen. There are many things that can be done to Yemen to help, like stopping what's happening. I think peace is the first thing that we would call for, because within the funding organizations like CARE and INGOs who are helping the people in Yemen is not going to be enough. Peace has to come first. How can we just stop or help the people while they're still not safe? So, death is being faced every day. So peace is the first thing that we should call for and advocate for this to make it happen. And I think as a woman, it's as a woman leader, and I'm sure all this stage with wonderful women all over the world can make the difference. And this is what we are born for, to make the world a better place for us and for others.
And I must say, while Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, was in Paris after his trip here, human rights organizations are suing him for torture, for rape in Yemen, and for the use of weapons that are banned. I must say, it was an honor to be with these incredible, brave, remarkable women, and I would love to thank especially Women in the World and Tina Brown for talking and bringing center stage this crisis in Yemen. In the Arab world, we say that the richest country in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, is bombing to oblivion the poorest country, which is Yemen, with the help of the Americans.
And I think people also have to remember that what Martin Luther King once said, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice here. So protect justice globally.
And bring peace to Yemen.
One last word. One last word to you, Bushra. If you have to think about your son's future in 10 years from today, he's 12, when he will be 22, how do you see his future?
That's a very difficult question because I'm afraid I don't know where he's going to be if this is not stopping. I think if not, he's not dead. Hopefully somewhere else better.
Thank you, Bushra, and I really commend your courage and bravery. Thank you.
Very competitive. I know what I want.